Our next speaker is Ken Phillips. Ken is co-founder and executive director of Independent Contractors of Australia. He's a board member of the HR Nicholls Society and writes in the Business Spectre. Ken is going to be speaking on building industry, intimidation, monopoly and union control. Please welcome Ken.
Now, I may be going to approach this topic from an angle you might not expect, and it will depend on whether this works or not. We get any sound? Nah.
It's coming from your laptop, not from the speaker.
Hold the mic next to
exploited by greedy bosses looking for a How much are you paying your workers per hour?
Yes, I will.
How much are you paid per hour?
Let my wife.
10, even 20 workers crammed into tiny rooms, running factories in old suburban houses or vacated derelict shops. You must know how much you're paying your workers.
Mấy người làm thì đó là 13 đồng một giờ.
$5 an hour? The workers earn as little as $2 to $5 an hour, slaving around the clock for a pittance. They get no superannuation, no work cover, and nobody pays tax. You must know how much you're paying your workers.
Mấy người làm thì đó là 13 đồng một giờ.
$5 an hour? $5 an hour? $5 an hour? The workers earn as little as $2 to $5 an hour, slaving around the clock for a pittance. They get no superannuation, no work cover, and nobody pays tax. There's a real battle out here who wants some of these kind of rats and mice who are really operating at the scum end of the industry, who are bringing the level down. Annie Delaney of the Victorian Textile Clothing...
I'll stop it there because the sounds, I don't know how many of you could hear that, but the gist of it, was she raided a sweatshop. She said she had an interpreter with her. She said, how much are you paying? The Vietnamese guy says to the interpreter $13 an hour. The reporter says $5 an hour. Oh, the reporter says $5 an hour. Are we working? And a blatant lie, an absolute blatant lie. And so that was a Tonight Show, Channel 7, 2002. And what unfolded from all of that campaign was outworker laws. I know the clothing and outworker industry exceedingly well, and I know that the migrant workers in the outworker industry were making very good money and putting their children through university and so forth. And because I knew that because I worked in the Cambodian community, and the outworker laws put them all out of business. And the whole thing based on a complete lie. So why is that relevant? That was 2002. Why is that relevant to what we're looking at now in terms of the corruption? Have a look at this picture once again, if I can get it. I use Apple. Apple works. These things are rubbish. It's like, set me up.
I should be there.
Thank you. Right. Tell me what's wrong with this picture. A recent picture, 2015. MUA strike down at the docks in Sydney. Tell me the problem with this picture.
Policemen standing there doing nothing.
Nah. Policeman standing there doing what?
Doing the picket.
The policeman's running the picket. It's not the MUA running the picket, it's the policeman running the picket. And that picture gives us the backdrop for the union inquiry for the Royal Commission into corruption. In a lot of respects, the problem is the policeman, not the situation involving the union. And I'd say, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, everyone reads the volumes of stuff that's going on with the Commission and how it's all folding out. I have a great pleasure to say that I was the author of the report on the East-West link that led to Bill having a few problems. I was an intimate player in the Chiquita situation. I'm very pleased that until now my name hasn't been mentioned anywhere, but that's all now water under the bridge. And what I would say is what we've seen from the Commission is something which was big deal. Right? Big whoop. We've seen a whole lot of what I would consider just to be normal corruption. What do you expect? We saw it with Annie Delaney and those pushing out just straight lies. And anyone who's been remotely involved in the business in and around the industrial relations system knows it's all about corruption. So all that's happened here is it's been put on the public record. There have been a few union officials embarrassed and the trade unions' reputations down in the dirt, and it will continue to go further into the dirt. Big whoop. And there'll be some prosecutions and we'll have some people go to jail, no question of that at all. The union movement's running around at the moment going, quick, 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 where are the fall guys? Quick, who are they going to be? And they're sorting out amongst themselves who the fall guys are, and those fall guys and gals won't know. And they'll go to jail and various bits and pieces, and then the system will just continue. Right? Nothing will change. Because that's the way business is done. Now, what has come out, which wasn't expected, is the level of corruption and collusion happening between companies and the unions themselves. That's the real story. That's the big story. That's the story that's not really being covered. The fact is, what we're seeing is that the evidence from the Royal Commission is that there is collusion, rampant collusion between unions and business for the purposes of conducting cartels in Australia. The reality is that we are an exceedingly corrupt society, and that corruption is embedded in the institutions and the behaviours of our society, and the policemen, the police people are not enforcing the rule of law. Rod Sims, because what we're really dealing with here is a corruption destruction system. It's endemic in Australia. And Rod Sims has been under a bit of pressure on this. I and some others have been making sure that we put as much pressure as we could. Had some very friendly and believing journalists. And Rod's made a very substantial statement in August this year. And he said, it's possible that in the past the ACCC has not sufficiently looked into such additional restrictive behaviour that has the purpose or effect of substantially lessening competition, thinking that such matters were covered by the industrial relations carve-outs. Now, the competition laws are not supposed to intrude into industrial relations. That's the key understanding as to how and why the industrial relations system is able to form itself into a competition destruction system through the collusion of unions with businesses. Rod went on to say, agreements between unions and companies that provide for the union to hinder the company's competitors. So this is what routinely goes on, and which is what we've seen through the Royal Commission, that companies routinely, absolutely routinely, enter into arrangements with unions for the purposes of competition destruction in one way or another. Jeff and myself were both discussing the reality of that in the supply chain of fuel into Australia. That's the truth of how business is conducted in the 12th largest economy in the world with only 23 million people. This is no different from doing business in New York or Chicago. People were a corrupt bunch. Now, the first bit of evidence that started to draw this out was the Toll and Transport Workers Union thing around about the middle of last year. So Rod Sims went on to say, for example, the recent agreement exposed in the commission between Toll and TW Holdings during negotiations for an EA in which Toll was alleged to have agreed to make donations to a union affiliate entity, and the TWU undertook certain KPIs such as auditing Toll's competitors. Now, this wasn't allegations, this was admissions by the lawyer for the TWU that they had admissions by the lawyer for Toll that they had secret agreements with the TWU for the TWU to harass Toll's competitors and to force Toll's competitors onto the same pricing arrangements that Toll had, and the TWU did this under its powers under the Industrial Relations Act. Right? And Toll was paying the TWU $50,000 a year to do that. Now, if that's not corrupt, I don't know what. But after considerable pressure, considerable media activity, the ACCC undertook a detailed investigation to the Royal Commission into evidence of TWU Toll collusion and concluded there was no breach of the competition law on the basis that Toll did not exercise sufficient market power. So Rod Sims said, or the ACCC said, or their lawyers said, we can't take action on this corruption because Toll doesn't have sufficient market power. Because, in other words, it doesn't match one of the provisions within the Act. I said in my discussions with Rod Sims, well, Rod, it's not Toll that's the issue that exercises the market power. It's the Transport Workers Union. Because the Transport Workers Union is seen as an industrial relations, as a union, it's not seen as a business. But I'm sorry, it is a business. It's a business along with the CFMEU and the NUW, the AMWU, that we've seen in the Commission, and these businesses, called unions, provide a service. And that service to companies is a competition destruction service. You pay us and we'll destroy the competition in one way or another. And those payments can be by brown paper bags, direct deposits into bank accounts, payments into superannuation funds, payments into redundancy funds, you name it. We'll invent whatever you need. So they are actually in business, and because they are in business across the whole sector, they are the ones that exercise significant market power. In actual fact, overarching market power, and companies willingly collude in that activity. Now, I got a bit hot under the collar under this. And so little old Independent Contractors Australia decided we'd have a go. Now, the Transport Workers Union, middle of last year, or towards the end of last year, applied to the ACCC for collective bargaining with Toll. So under the competition laws, owner-drivers are not employees, so you can't have collective bargaining for owner-drivers, but you can apply to the ACCC for authorisation to conduct collective bargaining. So we got a little bit cheeky. So we put in an objection. We put in an objection on the grounds that Toll and TWU are not fit and proper organisations to be granted authorisation based on the evidence and their admissions of anti-competitive collusion. Now, I would have thought this could give the ACCC a nice little, let's do the right thing stuff. So the ACCC replied to us that the evidence of collusion and admissions of collusion was not relevant to the collective bargaining application. Well, if it's not relevant, bloody hell don't know what is relevant. But I'm not a lawyer. Now, we then got extra cheeky and decided we'd try and appeal to the federal court. So I ran around and raised some money. And of course what we did was denied standing, so it all fell in a heap. But I haven't given up. So in the research for our federal court action, I decided I'd read all the Hansards of the Trade Practices Act, and I went back to work and read all the Hansards. And I discovered, unbeknownst to me, that there's a little thing called Section 93. And Section 93 was an amendment to the Australian Competition Law in 2006. It says collective bargaining notification scheme will be available because they were making collective bargaining easier for small business in 2006. Available for any small business, including independent contractor, which meets the necessary requirements. However, in line with the clear demarcation acknowledged and supported by the Dawson Review between the regulation of business and employment, it is not envisaged that the collective bargaining provisions would be used to pursue matters affecting employment relationships. All right? So here's a carve-out from the carve-out. Hansard's speech went on further, and I've underlined the word notice. Section 93AB provides that a purported collective bargaining notice is not a valid notice if it is given on behalf of the corporation by a trade union, an officer or a trade union, or a person acting in the direction of the trade union. You'd think, so in other words, the 2006 said, look, you can do some collective bargaining authorisations or get this rolling, but a union can't do it. Union can't even be a party to it. Read the next bit yourself, but then this is further reinforced. So this Hansard further reinforced by an amendment which makes a notification invalid if it is lodged on behalf of a small business by a trade union, its officers or a person acting on the direction of the trade union. So understand what the Toll is currently doing again. They've got another collective bargaining application in. TWU is acting on behalf of owner-drivers in South Australia applying to the ACCC for authorisation to collectively bargain with Toll. I'm saying to the ACCC that you can't even hear that application because that application is clearly in breach of 93A. But the TWU make application under Section 88. And according to the ACCC, Section 93 only applies to notifications, not authorisations. What? Now, this is legal dance routines of the most creative and wonderful order. The ordinary man, ordinary person, it looks very much like the ACCC ignoring the intention of Parliament. I've put in a application again saying no, reject it, this time on the basis of 93, and Parliament's intention was quite clear, but I'm going to get a reply from the ACCC that says, Ken, on your bike, because this only applies to notifications, not authorisations. So I thought I'd give you, instead of talking about, and I'd give you sort of a line that's run out of the commissioned corruption, part of the flow-on effect here. And our issue, a couple of issues, A, that we've discovered the evidence of endemic, systemic, intentional corruption. The solicitor advising, counsel advising the Commission's already named names, both union officials and employer managers who should be up on corruption charges. I know a couple of those. And managers. Now all of these people say, well, we're made to do it, we're made to do it, we're made to do it, you know. But the drunk says I was made to beat my wife because I was drunk. We don't excuse drunk behaviour in cars and manslaughter because you killed someone but you were drunk. I'm sorry, we don't excuse those things. But here we are, we have a situation in which we are demonstrably a very corrupt society, and we've got a whole series of processes and games in which we excuse that corruption and sanctify it and allow it to occur. I think the point, of course, with the construction sector is that in the construction sector this has all been developed to a very sophisticated level, you know, way beyond anyone else. That's the real point with the construction sector. So what are the solutions here? Well, at last year's conference, Roger Giles gave a stunningly good presentation. So Roger Giles was the inquiry into corruption in the construction sector in New South Wales going back a long time. Basically, he said, this is what I said you had to do at the time. He laid the whole thing out, the mud map, and very little of it's been done or some of it's being attempted. So really, let's just go back to Roger Giles's speech and pull out all those things. So part of the sorts of things he said, you have to have in place the ABCC, couldn't agree with that more. But the FWC, headed by Nigel Hadgkiss, and given an additional lease of life by the Senate, I've got to say, Nigel is doing a stunning job. Absolutely stunning job. You'd almost have to argue the ABCC is perhaps not necessary given what Nigel's doing. You absolutely need the construction code. The key dynamic in the construction sector, there is one. The construction sector is really, really easy to understand. Commercially, it is exclusively around one question. Who gets the next job? That's all it is. And the construction code says, if you want the next job, here's the IR stuff you have to not do. Right? Very simple. So government uses the power of its purse to require or require things to happen or things not to happen. There will be some developments in that space in the not too distant future. I think also what we have to do is quite clearly, there must be a blanket ban on any payment of any sort from a business to a union. And such payments should be seen as for what they are, which is corrupt, and probably criminally corrupt, whatever sort of corruption you want to call it. So that includes brown paper bags, it includes direct payments, it includes secret deals, it includes upfront payments that are not secret, it includes payments to union Christmas funds, redundancy funds, you name it, superannuation. All of these things have got to be on the table. There needs to be a focus on the Australian consumer law and the carve-out, the industrial relations carve-out, in terms of the consumer law, and even there should be consideration of establishing an industrial relations division of the ACCC, right? To ensure that you don't get the crossover. It's a matter of drawing that line in the sand very clearly. As a quick aside, superannuation is the milking machine for the Labor Party, Labor movement. They get away with that because there is no disclosure of what happens. And the bill before the Senate at the moment is weak as water. Having independent directors is not going to change anything. What will change it is complete disclosure, requirement for disclosure and transparency in terms of what the money in the superannuation funds, and that currently doesn't exist. So you know it's getting milked. And the other one, which I'll just throw in, I've got a very nice Christmas. I've fought for nearly 8 years to get unfair contract laws for small businesses. We got that through the Senate with the objection of Abbott. We became a player in his downfall, unwittingly, didn't know it at the time. And so the unfair contract laws being put in place for small business have a very, very important industrial relations impact. Not as strong as it should be, because I was fighting for no limit on the contract levels. I won't go into the detail of it, but we got a fairly good thing. So the same unfair contract laws that apply to consumers are now being applied to small business contracts, and we're in the implementation phase, so they'll come into full effect around about this time next year. And what that means in the construction sector, for example, is that the game in the construction sector is the head contractors get the contract. If it's a fixed price contract, you cascade your risk down through the contract chain, down to the little guy down at the end, screw them over. If you can't get a fixed price, you do both. If you're not on a fixed price, you both leverage up to charge the client more and pass your risk down. It's a fairly straightforward business model for the top end of town. What the unfair contract laws will cause problems for that process, the risk transference process, when it hits the small business sector, down the bottom. I didn't talk about this while we were trying to get the bill through, because I didn't want anyone to really know, but that's the consequence of that. So I'm rather pleased, and we will be active in bringing to the attention of the ACCC contracts affecting small business people in the construction sector. Very active. So there we are.
I'd like to ask a question about the example you gave us at TWU and Toll. What you're saying seems to be predicated on the fact that owner-drivers were employers.
No, they're not. So therefore the ACCC has to authorise collective bargaining under the for owner-drivers because they're not employees, because you've got commercial contracts.
Right. Does the TWU's rules allow them to represent?
Well, the TWU rules. You don't need to go beyond that.
I'm just surprised that you would get the response that you had from the ACCC saying that, I think I got the impression they were saying that they want to reserve the right to allow collective bargaining for owner-drivers, and I can understand why the ACCC would think that. But I just wonder whether
I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. In fact, it should be able to occur. The collective bargaining provisions for small business were designed and intended for, say, small supermarkets that want to get together and buy a whole lot of chocolate from Cadbury's and want to be able to get together to negotiate to buy a whole lot of chocolate from Cadbury's and have the same or similar similar purchasing power to Coles and Woolworths. And so when little supermarkets get together, it's the supermarkets themselves who have to apply, and they have the authorisation. The authorisation belongs to the person who's seeking to have the commercial negotiation. So if the owner-drivers get together, and I've had success with the ACCC on this in the past, there's absolutely nothing wrong. In actual fact, it's the correct way to go, that the owner-drivers themselves, who have to be named, have the collective bargaining authorisation. Right? Because they're the people engaged in the commercial contract. So if the application's being made for the owner drivers as named, not a problem. But to have the Transport Workers Union have ownership and be given the authorisation, sorry, no. They don't have the commercial contract. They're not running the commercial risk. They can behave as they like, because if you're going to give a collective bargaining authorisation, the party who has the collective bargaining right must also have responsibilities. And if you give it to the union, they don't have anything.
One last quick question.
Yeah, this ultimately all goes back to essentially to allowing picketing violence. If there was no picketing violence, we wouldn't have any of these problems anywhere.
No, well, look,
that really needs to be understood.
The point I want to make with all of this, and the thing I gave with Scott, said with Scott before, this government has no political appetite to make any changes to the Industrial Relations Act of substance, right? And they will not have for a long time. So what can we do? We can get the Fair Contracts Acts up, right? The construction codes are administrative instruments. Look at what we can do. And what we can and should be doing is looking very closely at the competition laws and seek for changes to the competition laws. That's a much stronger moral basis for arguing for change and we're identified that it's where the real problem is.
Thanks, Ken.